I found the diary in a shoebox at the back of my closet last spring, and I almost put it back without opening it, the way you almost put things back when some part of you knows that opening them is going to cost something. My name is Francis. I'm 88 years old, and the line I found inside that diary, written in my own handwriting in the summer of 1953, when I was 17 years old and had no idea what I was recording, has not left me alone for the 8 months since I read it, and I do not think it is going to leave me alone for whatever time I have remaining. And I have decided that the not leaving alone is something I want to talk about rather than something I want to manage in the quiet of my own interior, because I think that talking about it might be useful to someone. And at 88, useful is the standard I apply to most things I choose to do with my time. I want to tell you the whole story, because the whole story is the only honest version, and because the line itself, taken out of the whole story, would be a curiosity rather than the thing it actually is, which is a window into the moment, a life divided itself into a before and an after, without the person living that life having any awareness that the division was occurring. I grew up in a small town in central Illinois, the only child of parents who had wanted more children and had not had them, which produced in the household a particular quality of focused attention that was both a gift and, occasionally, a weight, the gift of being known well by the people who loved you, and the weight of being the sole recipient of everything two loving and somewhat anxious people had to offer a child. My father managed a hardware store that his own father had started, and that he ran with a steadiness and a quiet competence that I understand now as the expression of a man who had found the work that suited him and who brought to it every day the full quality of his attention. My mother taught piano lessons in our living room 3 afternoons a week and kept a garden that was, in the opinion of everyone on our street, the best garden in the neighborhood, and she kept it with the same quality of attentive care that she brought to her piano students and to me, the quality of someone who believes that the things in her keeping deserve the best she has to give them. They were good parents. I want to say that clearly and without the qualifications that the story I am telling might seem to invite, because the story is not about their failure or their limitation. They were good parents who loved me genuinely and who prepared me in the ways they were capable of for a life that turned out to contain things they had not prepared me for, because no parent can prepare a child for everything, and because the things that divide a life before and after are usually not the things anyone saw coming. I was 17 in the summer of 1953, the summer the diary was kept, and I want to describe who I was that summer with as much accuracy as 88 years of distance permits, which means I want to describe her honestly rather than with a retrospective softening that time, and affection can apply to the memory of one's younger self. She was a serious girl, the 17-year-old I was, serious in the way that some girls are serious when they have been given the full attention of 2 thoughtful adults for their entire lives, and have absorbed from that attention a quality of engagement with the world that their peers sometimes find slightly intense. She read widely and thought carefully, and had opinions about things that she expressed with a directness that was, in the social landscape of a small Illinois town in 1953, occasionally more than the situation called for. She was also, that summer, in love. I want to say it that plainly because that is what it was. Whatever the 17-year-old might have called it, or thought she was calling it, whatever the social vocabulary of 1953 in central Illinois permitted a girl of that age to understand about her own interior life. She was in love with a boy named Daniel, who was 18 that summer, the son of the minister of the Methodist church her family attended, a tall and serious boy with dark eyes and the quality of genuine listening that I have found, across 88 years of knowing people, to be one of the rarer and more valuable things a person can possess. He listened when I talked with the complete attention of someone who was actually interested in what was being said, who found the person in front of him worth the full investment of his attention. And at 17, in a world that did not always extend that quality of attention to the things a girl thought and felt and wanted, The experience of being listened to like that was, as I understand it now, the beginning of everything. We spent that summer in the way that two serious and bookish 17 and 18-year-olds in a small town in 1953 spent the summer they were too young to understand was significant, which is to say, we spent it reading and talking and walking and sitting on the porch of his family's house in the evenings when his father was out and his mother was in the kitchen, and the night was warm enough to stay outside without a reason, simply there, simply together, in the particular ease of two people who have found in each other a quality of company that they had not found elsewhere, and that they were too young to understand was not ordinary, was not what most people found, was something that could not be assumed to persist or to be replaced if it was lost. I kept the diary that summer because my mother had given it to me for my birthday in June, a small thing with a red cover and a lock, whose key I immediately lost. And I wrote in it with the inconsistency of someone who is keeping a diary, because she has been given one rather than because she has a sustained relationship with the act of writing things down. Most of the entries are brief, a few sentences about the day, what the weather was, who I saw, what I read, the ordinary record of an ordinary summer, rendered in the shorthand of someone who is not yet a practiced diarist, and who does not yet understand that the ordinary record of an ordinary summer is, from the distance of 70 years, anything but ordinary. The entry I found is from August 14th, 1953. I know the date because I looked at the date after. I read the entry, looked at it, and sat with it, the way you sit with a specific point on a map when you are trying to understand how you got from there to here. August 14th, a Thursday, and the entry is 4 sentences long, and 3 of the 4 sentences are about the heat and a book I was reading and something my mother had made for dinner. And the 4th sentence is the one that has not left me alone since I read it. The 4th sentence says, "Daniel told me today he thinks he loves me, and I believe him, and I think I might love him too. But I told him I wasn't sure, because I wasn't sure what came next. I wasn't sure what came next." I read that sentence last spring, sitting in the chair in my living room, with the diary open in my lap, and I read it several times, because the first reading did not produce the full weight of it, produced only the recognition of the memory, the summer and the porch and Daniel's dark eyes, and the particular quality of that evening. And it was only on the 3rd or 4th reading that the full weight arrived with the specific force of something that has been waiting for a long time to be properly understood. I wasn't sure what came next. What came next was that I did not answer him. Not that night, not in the days that followed, not in the weeks before he left for college in September, not in the letters he wrote me from his first year away, that I answered with a careful and friendly warmth that was not what he had offered, and that he understood, with the intelligence he brought to everything, was not a yes. What came next was that Daniel went to college and became a minister like his father, and married a woman named Helen in 1957, and had 4 children, and lived a good and full life in a town in Ohio, all of which I know because small towns maintain their connections across decades, and because I heard these things without seeking them, and held them in the way you hold information about people you have carried with you, without acknowledging that you are carrying them. What came next, for me, was a life that was genuinely good in most of the ways that a life can be genuinely good, and that had, in its goodness, a particular quality that I am only now, at 88, able to name with full accuracy. It had a quality of the provisional, a quality of being a good life, and also, underneath the goodness, a life that had been built around an unanswered question, around the perpetually deferred resolution of the thing that the 17-year-old had declined to resolve on an August evening in 1953, because she was not sure what came next. I want to be honest about what I mean by that, because I am not telling you that my life was unhappy, or that the life I lived was the wrong life, or that Daniel was the one who got away, in the sense that romantic mythology attaches to that phrase. I am telling you something more specific and more interesting than that. which is that the sentence in the diary showed me something about the 17-year-old I was and the decision she made that I had not, across 70 years of living the life that followed from it, ever fully seen. She was afraid. That is what the sentence says. If you read it the way I read it on the third and fourth time, if you hear the not sure what came next as the thing it actually was, which was not genuine uncertainty about her feelings, because the sentence before it says, I believe him and I think I might love him too, which is not the language of someone who doesn't know what she feels, but the language of someone who does know and who is finding a way not to say so, finding a way to defer the certainty, to keep the question open, because opening to the certainty meant opening to the next thing, and the next thing was unknown, and therefore frightening to a girl who had been, all her life, in the careful and attentive keeping of two people who made sure she was prepared for everything she encountered. She had not been prepared for this, and the not being prepared for it produced, in the moment Daniel told her he loved her, not a response to the love, but a management of the response, a step backward from the edge of something that was too large and too unknown to simply step into, and the stepping backward produced the sentence in the diary. The I wasn't sure what came next that was, in its way, the truest thing she wrote that summer, and also the sentence that cost her the most. That cost her, if I am willing to follow the thought all the way to where it leads, the possibility of a life organized around a love that she had, on an August evening when the answer was still available to be given, declined to reach for. I married a man named Arthur in 1959. Arthur was a good man, a decent and reliable man who loved me with a consistency and a steadiness that I valued genuinely and received fully in a way that I am not sure I could have received Daniel's love at 23, which is the age I was when I married Arthur, and the age at which the 17-year-old step backward had become the organizing fact of my emotional life, the fact around which I had arranged my understanding of what I was capable of wanting and receiving and allowing myself to have. Arthur loved me, and I loved him back in the way I was capable of loving back, which was warmly and genuinely, and with a reservation at the center of myself that I am not sure I was ever fully aware of until I read the diary entry and understood where the reservation had come from. We were married for 43 years, until Arthur's death in 2002. We had 2 children, a son named Richard and a daughter named Jane, and we built a life together that was real, and that I valued, and that I do not regret, in the terms that regret implies a wish to undo what was done, because undoing the life with Arthur would undo Richard and Jane and everything that came from them. And I would not undo those things for any revision of the past that I can imagine. But I am also, at 88, honest enough to hold 2 things at once, without requiring them to cancel each other out, honest enough to say that the life with Arthur was genuinely good, and also that the life I might have had if the 17-year-old had answered differently, was a life I can feel the shape of from this distance, a shape that is not nothing, and that the diary entry brought back with a vividness I had not expected. I want to tell you about my daughter Jane, because Jane is the reason I had the diary out in the first place, and the reason is relevant to the story in a way that I think matters. Jane is 60 years old, and she has been in a relationship with a man named Paul for 3 years. A good man, a patient and attentive man, who loves her in a way that I can see from the outside with the clarity that mothers see these things, and that Jane tells me she can feel from the inside, but is not sure what to do with. She has been not sure what to do with it for most of the 3 years, has been, in the vocabulary she uses when we talk about it, waiting to feel more ready, waiting to feel more certain, waiting to understand what the next step would require of her before she is willing to take it. I recognize this. That is why I got the diary out. She was at my house for dinner in February, and she was talking about Paul with the careful and qualified language she uses for him, the language of someone who is managing a feeling rather than expressing it, and something in the managing produced in me a recognition that I could not yet name, but that felt like it had a source somewhere in my own history, rather than simply in my concern for her. And after she left, I went to the closet and found the shoebox and found the diary and turned, without knowing exactly what I was looking for, to the summer of 1953. I found the sentence on August 14th, and I sat with it for the rest of that evening. And what I understood by the end of the evening was that Jane was living a version of the sentence, was standing on the same evening porch in the same warm summer, holding the same feeling with the same not sure what comes next that had organized my own emotional life across 7 decades. And that I had passed it to her not as a lesson, but as a demonstration, as the lived example of how a capable and intelligent woman manages the feelings that are too large and too unknown to simply step into, and that the demonstration had been so consistent and so thorough across 60 years of her, watching me, that she had learned it the way I had learned it, as the way capable people relate to love that exceeds their preparation for it. I called her the next morning, not to tell her about the diary, not immediately, because the diary was still something I was in the process of understanding and not yet something I knew how to give to her. I called her to ask her something I had not asked before, which was whether she was afraid. Not afraid of Paul, not afraid of the relationship specifically, but afraid in the way the 17-year-old had been afraid of the not knowing what comes next, that opening fully to something large and uncontrolled and possibly permanent requires. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, yes. Yes, she was afraid, had been afraid since the beginning, and the fear was not about Paul, who was reliable and kind and present in all the ways that reliability and kindness and presence could make themselves evident. The fear was about herself, about what it would mean to say yes to something she couldn't fully see the shape of from where she was standing, about the particular vulnerability of stepping into something that was going to change the shape of her life in ways she couldn't yet know. I told her about the diary then. I told her about August 14th, 1953, and about Daniel and the porch and the warm evening and the sentence I had written at 17 that had come back to me 70 years later as the clearest picture I had of the thing that had organized my interior life without my fully understanding it was organizing it. I told her about Arthur, about what I valued in the life we had built, and about the reservation at the center of it that I had not understood until the diary entry showed it to me. I told her what the not sure what comes next had cost me, not in the terms of a life badly lived, because that was not what it had been, but in the terms of a love that I had held at the edge of its full possibility for 30 years, before I allowed it to become what it was capable of being, and what I wondered, in the sleepless honesty of the previous night, whether I had ever fully allowed it to become. She cried. I want to say that, not to describe the effect I produced, but because her crying was not only sadness, was also something else. The specific release of someone who has been recognized in something they had not been able to name themselves, who has heard their own interior condition described from the outside with enough accuracy to feel simultaneously seen and exposed, and for whom the seeing and the exposure are, in that moment, both exactly what was needed. She cried, and I sat with the crying, and did not move toward the resolution of it, because I have learned, at 88, that some crying needs to be sat with rather than resolved, and that the sitting with it is its own form of the thing I should have been better at for most of my life, which is allowing what is large and uncontrolled to be what it is, rather than managing it into something smaller. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about Paul, and about what she was afraid of, and about what I had been afraid of at 17, and about the specific relationship between intelligence and the management of feeling, the way that capable people sometimes use their capability as a form of protection against the feelings that cannot be made capable, cannot be made more legible or more controllable by the application of intelligence, that simply are what they are, and that require, if they are going to be properly received, the willingness to step into them without knowing what comes next. I want to tell you about what happened after that conversation, because what happened is not simply a resolution, and I want to be accurate about that. Jane has not married Paul. She has not resolved in any clean or completed way the fear that I recognized in her 3 years of careful language about him. What she has done in the months since our conversation is named the fear, which is different from resolving it, but is also, as I understand from my own 70-year experience of the unnamed version, significantly different from not naming it. She named it to me, and she named it to Paul, which was the braver of the two namings, told him that she was not uncertain about him, but uncertain about her own capacity to step into what he was offering without holding some part of herself back, and that she was working on the capacity, and that the working on it was real, even if it was slow and did not always look like progress from the outside. Paul, being the kind of man he is, received it with the patience and the genuine listening that had been his quality from the beginning, and they are still together, and Jane is still working on the capacity, and I am watching from the distance of 88 years, with the specific tenderness of a woman who recognizes in her daughter the formation she passed to her and who is rooting, with everything she has left to root with, for the daughter to find her way to the other side of it, before the diary entry of her own life has accumulated 70 years of unanswerable weight. I want to go back to the diary now, to what it was and what it has been since I found the entry in August, because I have been describing the effects of the entry without fully describing the experience of finding it. And the experience itself is something I want to account for, because it contains something that I think is worth telling. When I read that sentence for the 3rd time, the I wasn't sure what came next that I have been returning to throughout this telling. What I felt was not immediately grief or recognition, or any of the things I have described feeling in the analysis of the sentence that followed. What I felt first was tenderness. Tenderness for the girl who wrote it, for the 17-year-old on the August evening who was holding something large and real and frightening in her hands, and who was doing the best she could with it, given what she had, given the formation she had received, and the tools available to her in the social and emotional vocabulary of 1953 in central Illinois, given that nobody had told her, because nobody had known to tell her, that the not knowing what comes next is not a reason not to step forward, is in fact the fundamental condition of every significant step a person takes in their life, because the significant steps are always into the unknown, always into the territory that cannot be seen from where you are standing, always requiring you to give up the certainty of the known for the possibility of the unknown, and that the giving up is not a failure of preparation, but simply the price of the significant thing. Nobody told her that, and so she stepped back from the edge of it and wrote 4 sentences in a red diary and went to sleep and woke up and went through the remaining weeks of summer and the years that followed with the unresolved question in her interior, the way a splinter goes into the body, present and without constant pain, forgotten for long stretches until something presses on it, and the forgotten pain returns to remind you it was always there. I forgive her. I want to say that because I think the saying of it matters, and because it took me some time, in the months after finding the entry, to arrive at it. There was a period, in the early weeks after the diary, when what I felt toward the 17-year-old was not tenderness, but something closer to frustration, the frustration of someone who can see from 88 years of distance exactly what the girl on the porch should have done, and who finds the not doing of it, from that distance, almost incomprehensible, almost a failure so obvious that it should not have been possible. I sat with that frustration, and I followed it, and I recognized in it the familiar shape of my own harshness, the same standard I applied to my professional mistakes and my social errors and the various failures of judgment across a long life. And I understood that the standard, applied to a 17-year-old girl in 1953 who was doing the best she could with the formation and the tools she had been given, was not just and was not useful and was not the response the girl deserved from the 88-year-old she became. She deserves tenderness. She made a choice that cost her something, and she made it from fear, and the fear was real, and the world that produced. The fear was real, and she was 17 years old on an August evening, and she didn't know that the choice she was making was going to be a choice she would still be sitting with 70 years later. How could she have known that? 17-year-olds do not know which of their choices are the ones that divide the before from the after. They do not know, cannot know, that the sentence written carelessly in a diary, because the weight of it is not yet visible, is the sentence that will come back to them at 88 with the full weight of 70 years behind it. She did not know. She was afraid, and she stepped back and she wrote what she wrote, and I forgive her, and the forgiving of her is also, I understand, the forgiving of myself, the forgiving of the woman who carried the fear forward across 70 years, and the woman who passed it to her daughter, and the woman who found the diary entry and needed several months to arrive at the tenderness that the girl deserved from the beginning. I want to say something about Daniel, because he has been in this story all along, and I want to give him his proper place in it before I finish. Daniel died in 2011, which I know because his son published an obituary in the online record that has made such things findable in ways they were not before, and I found it not by looking for it, but by the accident of a search that produced his name in a result, and that I clicked on before I could decide whether I wanted to. He had been a minister for 43 years, and a husband to Helen for 52 years, and a father to 4 children and a grandfather to 9. And the obituary described him in the language of obituaries that tries to compress a full person into a few hundred words, as a man of great patience and genuine kindness, who had a particular gift for listening, which made me cry in a way I had not expected, because the gift for listening was the thing I had known about him at 17 on the porch, the thing that had been part of why the evening on the porch had felt the way it felt, and the continuity of that gift across 60 years of his life after that evening was both a comfort and its own kind of ache. He had a good life. I believe that, from what the obituary and the things I know can tell me, and the believing of it is important to me, because the grief I carry about the August evening is not grief that his life was not full or good or meaningful. It is something more specific than that, more interior. The grief of a thing that was possible, and that did not become actual. A grief not for what happened to him, but for what did not happen between us. And the distinction matters, because the grief that contains the wish for his unhappiness is not the grief I carry, was never the grief I carried, and I want to be clear about that. I am 88 years old, and I have been sitting with a diary entry for 8 months, and I want to tell you, as directly as I can, what I have concluded from the sitting. The conclusion is not a lesson, not a formula, not the kind of summarizing wisdom that 8 months of sitting with a devastating sentence might seem to produce. The conclusion is more like an understanding, a clarification of something that was always true, and that the diary entry made visible, which is that the things we are afraid of in the moments when the fear matters most are almost never as dangerous as the fear makes them seem, and that the not knowing what comes next, which is the specific fear that the sentence in the diary names, is not a reason to step back from the edge of something significant, but simply the condition of the edge, the defining feature of any moment that contains within it the possibility of a genuine change in the shape of a life. The significant things are always on the other side of the not knowing. That is what I understand now, at 88, from the inside of a life that has been genuinely good and that has also been organized, in ways I did not fully see while I was living it, around the management of the not knowing rather than the willingness to step into it. I stepped into some things. I had courage in some areas of my life, in my work, and in certain friendships, and in the raising of my children, courage that I brought, and that was real, and that I am grateful I had. But in the interior spaces, in the places where the feeling was large and the next step was unknown, and the management of the feeling was easier than the full reception of it, I stepped back, and the stepping back is what the 17-year-old sentence in the diary is the record of, the first instance of a pattern that I am only now, 70 years later, seeing in its full shape. Jane is 60 years old, and she is standing on the edge of something, and I am watching her with the full investment of a mother who has been where she is and who wants for her, more than she knows how to say, The willingness to step forward that the 17-year-old in 1953 did not have. Not the certainty of what comes next, because that is not available and was never available, and the waiting for it is itself the management of the fear rather than the resolution of it. Just the willingness, just the one step, just the opening of the hands to something that is large and real and not fully known, and that is, in its not being fully known, exactly what every love worth having has always been. The diary is still in my living room. I have not put it back in the shoebox. I look at it sometimes, at the red cover that is slightly faded now from 70 years of being in a shoebox in a closet, and I think about the girl who kept it, and the summer she was keeping it in, and the August evening that the last entry of any significance captures in 4 sentences, 3 of which I do not remember, and 1 of which I will not forget. I wasn't sure what came next. She was 17. She was afraid. She did the best she could, and the best she could was stepping back from the edge of something she could not yet see the shape of, and the stepping back produced a life that was genuinely good and also genuinely incomplete in a way that she did not understand until 88, until a red diary in a shoebox at the back of a closet gave her the sentence back with 70 years of weight behind it. If you are standing at an edge, I am not going to tell you to jump. I am going to tell you to look at what you are stepping back from, to look at it directly and ask yourself whether the not knowing what comes next is the fear talking or genuine wisdom. And if it is the fear talking, to consider what the fear has been protecting you from and what the protection has cost, and whether the cost, from wherever you are standing, seems worth the price. From 88, I can tell you that the price is higher than the stepping forward would have been. That is what the diary showed me. That is what I wanted to tell you.